Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu relevant for GS paper 2. Supreme Court sets up panel to look into Jammu and Kashmir internet curbs. Let's look at the background. On August 5 and 6, 2019, the relationship of the then state of Jammu and Kashmir with the Union of India was altered. The special status accorded to the then state under Articles 370 and 35 capital A was revoked. Not only that, the state was downgraded and bifurcated into union territories. The Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and the Union Territory of Ladakh. But on August 4, the government anticipated protests. The government anticipated breakdown of law and order. The government anticipated violent protests against the revocation of the special status. And that is why several security steps, measures, precautions were taken by the government. Precautions such as number one, prominent social activists, political leaders, human rights activists were either arrested or put under house arrest. Also, Section 144 was imposed. There were restrictions on the free movement of people. Mobile internet was suspended. Even the broadband internet was suspended. Even the telephone network was suspended. That means even the landline phones stopped functioning. And then over a period of time, some of these restrictions were eased. For example, landlines, they started functioning. First, postpaid mobile phones started functioning. Then the prepaid phones started functioning. But there were still restrictions on the internet. And then what happened? The editor of a Jammu-based newspaper, Anuradha Basin, she filed a petition before the Supreme Court. She is the editor of a Jammu-based newspaper called Kashmir Times. She argued that we have a fundamental right under Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A, which deals with freedom of speech and expression. Although the Indian Constitution does not explicitly talk about freedom of press, but Supreme Court has said freedom of press is also a fundamental right under Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A. Anuradha Basin argued that her reporters and other journalists in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, they are not in a position to file their papers. They are not in a position to file their reports. They are not in a position to submit their stories. And that amounts to violation of freedom of press, which is a fundamental right under Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A. But this petition was delayed. The final ruling on this petition was delayed. And ultimately, in January 2020, the Supreme Court gave its final order. The Supreme Court, in its judgment, said access to internet is also a fundamental right. Not only because it comes under freedom of speech and expression, which is under Article 19(1)(a), but also because 19 Clause 1 Clause G, which is a fundamental right guaranteed to every citizen to pursue his or her trade. And since in today's era, internet plays a very important role in carrying out trade opportunities, the Supreme Court ruled access to internet is also a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a) as well as under Article 19(1)(g). Supreme Court further said, yes, these restrictions can be imposed, but these restrictions should also be proportionate. It should not be disproportionate. And in response to this petition by Anuradha Basin, what the government did, in the later part of January 2020, the government also allowed internet. But how? The government allowed broadband internet, but the government allowed access to only 300 whitelisted sites. That means only these are 300 websites that you can access. No social media. There is going to be restriction on social media as well. But then the citizens in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, they resorted to virtual private network, and started accessing social media sites using the VPN. And ultimately, government said even the social media is allowed, but low speed internet, only 2G, no 4G or 3G is permitted in the Union Territory. Then came the pandemic of COVID-19. And because of COVID-19, not just the Union Territory, but the entire country was put under lockdown. But while the rest of the country had the access to 4G or high speed internet through which they can update themselves how to fight this pandemic, they can access online education, they can carry on with their businesses. But then the residents of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, they were deprived of high speed 4G internet connectivity. And then a petition was filed in the Supreme Court challenging the continuing restrictions on high speed internet. But the government said we can't allow high speed internet connectivity in the Union Territory because there is terrorism, also because there is cross border infiltration. Not only that, there is going to be a threat to public order if 4G access is provided. Safety of citizens is of paramount importance to us. That is why 4G connectivity should not be allowed. And this high speed internet is used by handlers across the border to recruit terrorists. But the petitioners argued, petitioners who were media professionals, school associations, private citizens, they claimed that lack of internet access or high speed internet access, it has crippled the Union Territory's efforts or medical efforts to curb COVID-19. It has also pulled the rug under the online education and the businesses, and that is why high speed internet access should be provided. Now what the Supreme Court has done, Supreme Court has set up a panel which will be headed by the Home Secretary, Union Home Secretary, the Secretary of Communications, the Government of India, as well as the Chief Secretary of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. This panel will look into whether there is a requirement to continue to have these restrictions on high-speed internet access in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And the Supreme Court has asked this committee to look into immediately whether there is a necessity to continue with these restrictions. But if you look at this newspaper article in detail and the order of the Supreme Court, there is an inherent problem with this order. If you look at Article 32 of the Constitution of India, it talks about a remedy. Whenever fundamental rights are violated, directly approach the Supreme Court. In fact, B.R. Ambedkar, the architect of the Constitution, has said that Article 32 is the fundamental of all fundamental rights. If Article 32 is not present, every other fundamental right would only be paperized. That means all the other fundamental rights would not be in a position to be enforced unless and until there is a remedy available, and you can use this remedy if fundamental rights are violated. So if the petitioners had approached the Supreme Court asking for the restoration of 4G internet connectivity in the Union Territory, the Supreme Court should not have sent the ball back to the government, because in practice it leads to the very negation of the concept of judicial review. How? Every action of the executive can be reviewed by the judiciary. That is what we call judicial review. But here, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Secretary of the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Secretary of Communications, Chief Secretary of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, they have imposed these restrictions. And now the Supreme Court is asking the very committee to look into whether these restrictions should continue or not. So what Supreme Court has done, it has abdicated its responsibility and has surrendered its power of judicial review. And this also violates principles of natural justice. One of the principles of natural justice is no person shall be the judge in his own case. So if these individuals have imposed restrictions on high-speed internet connectivity in Jammu and Kashmir, and the same committee is asked whether your actions are valid or invalid, it amounts to violation of principles of natural justice. This is where we come across another important concept called judicial evasion. Judicial evasion primarily means Supreme Court or court is saying not now, which means whenever there is an important case to be heard by the court does not decide issues until it is too late for the outcome to matter. That means the Supreme Court or the courts, they are delaying the decisions on important matters. For example, electoral bonds. Electoral bonds, many people argue, are unconstitutional because they violate free and fair elections, which is also part of the basic structure of Indian Constitution. There are numerous petitions challenging the constitutional validity of electoral bonds, but the court is not hearing these petitions. The court is basically saying not now. Not now, that means not deciding issues until it is too late for the outcome to matter. Even in 2021, if the Supreme Court would say these electoral bonds are unconstitutional, but the outcome of this verdict would not matter. Because till 2021, the government of the day would pocket thousands of crores of rupees through electoral bond scheme. Now in this particular case, it is not judicial evasion, it is judicial evasion by abnegation. Another important concept that you will see in the news over a period of time, which basically means in judicial evasion, the court is saying not now, but in judicial evasion by abnegation, the court is saying not us. That means if these are the petitioners who are asking for the restoration of 4G high-speed internet connectivity in the Union Territory, they are asking the court to issue an order. The court is saying not us, take a look at the committee. Let's have a committee and this committee will decide whether there is a necessity in continuing with these restrictions or not. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news on page number 8, relevant for GS paper 2. Right to religion, Supreme Court explains reference to larger bench. Now let me tell you the background of this newspaper article very briefly. There is a temple, Sabarimala in Kerala. The presiding deity is Lord Ayyappa. There was a ban on the entry of the women of menstruating age. In the age group of 10 to 50, the women were denied entry into the inner sanctum sanctorum of the Sabarimala temple. Why? Because the deity is Lord Ayyappa. Lord Ayyappa is a brahmachari or Neshtika brahmachari, what we call eternal celibate. Then a petition was filed in the Supreme Court that these restrictions are unconstitutional. Women of all age groups should be allowed to pray at the Sabarimala temple. And then a 5-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court was set up, and Supreme Court said women of all age groups may pray at the Sabarimala. And the Chief Justice of India was Justice Deepak Mishra. The year was 2018. Then a review petition was filed against this 2018 order of the Supreme Court, challenging the validity of this order. So basically the petitioners argued that women of all age groups should not be allowed entry inside the sanctum sanctorum of the Sabarimala temple. This review petition was heard by another 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court headed by Chief Justice of India, Justice Ranjan Gogoi. And Justice Ranjan Gogoi did something unprecedented. What he did, he kept the review petition pending. Why? He said that there are other petitions pending before the court which raise similar questions as the Sabarimala petition. Which are these petitions? Number 1, Muslim women are not allowed entry inside the dargahs. Second, female genital mutilation practiced by the Dawoodi Bohra community. Dawoodi Bohra is a sect in Shia Islam. What they do, they have a belief that once a girl child attains the age of 6 or 7, her clitoris should be either completely or partially cut. Why? Because they have a belief that this clitoris is an unwanted skin and it is the source of all sins. And that is why once the girl child attains the age of 6 or 7, her clitoris is either completely or partially removed. Third petition, Parsi women, if they marry a non-Parsi man, they are not allowed entry inside the fire temples. Why? Review petitions are either accepted or rejected. Review petitions are not kept pending till the time court hears other matters. Also, what the Supreme Court did, it framed larger issues, or it framed questions of larger issues. The Supreme Court said this review petition should be kept pending till a larger bench of the Supreme Court addresses these larger questions. If you want to know more about these larger issues, there is a detailed video lecture available on our YouTube channel regarding the Sabarimala review petition case. Please go through that video lecture. But very briefly here, once the term of Justice Ranjan Gogoi was over, Justice Bobde was appointed as the Chief Justice of India. What Justice Bobde did, he set up a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court to hear these larger issues. At that time, various petitions were filed challenging the right of a court to set up such a bench. Petition was filed that the Supreme Court does not have the power to refer these larger questions. The petitioners argued, while hearing a review petition, the court has to only either accept this review petition or reject this review petition. It cannot refer larger issues to another bench of the Supreme Court. In short, what was the argument? The argument was, when Sabarimala review petition was heard by the Supreme Court, it should have been either accepted or rejected. It should not have referred these larger issues to another bench of the Supreme Court. But then in February 10, the 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court, it rejected all these objections. But it did not explain why. It did not publish its detailed judgment. And now this detailed judgment has been published. And in its detailed judgment, the Supreme Court has invoked Article 142. The Supreme Court has said that Supreme Court has the power under Article 142 that it can issue any order, it can take up any cause to do complete justice. And when Justice Ranjan Gogoi kept this review petition pending, referred larger issues to the Supreme Court is well within its powers under Article 142 to take up any cause in order to do complete justice. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper. First up, equal freedom and forced labor. If you look at various state governments, for example, Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, they have changed labor laws. For example, if you look at Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan and Punjab, they have extended the maximum daily hours of work from 8 to 9 hours till 12 hours. That means as of now, the workers cannot work more than 8 to 9 hours a day. Now this number of hours has been increased to 12. Also, you can also work overtime. But for overtime, in Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan and Punjab, you will be paid double the wages. But in Gujarat, even if you work overtime, you won't be paid double wages. This we have discussed in detail on 9th of May. But if you look at labor laws in India, we can broadly classify labor laws into 4 categories. One set of labor laws deal with conditions of work. Another set of labor laws deals with wages and remuneration. Another set of laws deal with social security. Another set of laws deal with employment security and industrial relations. For example, under conditions of work, we have an act called Factories Act. This Factories Act is to ensure that safety measures are there in factories. We should have provisions to safeguard and promote the health and welfare of workers, for example. Similarly, under this section, we have another type of law called Shops and Commercial Establishment Act. This act regulates the number of hours of work, payment, overtime, weekly day off, other holidays, annual leave, employment of children and young persons, employment of women, for example, that is the domain of Shops and Commercial Establishments Act. Under wages and remuneration, we have Minimum Wages Act of 1948. So there are various sets of laws. In total, it is argued that there are 200 state laws. There are 50 central laws in India. And that is why the labor laws in India have been heavily criticized. So there was a talk that the central government is trying to simplify all these laws to have some sort of a labor code in this country so that it becomes easy for the factories to also do their business. It becomes easier for the employees and workers as well to do their job. So there has to be some sort of simplification of these labor laws. But what the state governments have done under the garb of COVID-19 so as to provide more impetus to the factories and the industries. Uttar Pradesh, for example, it has decided to suspend all labor laws, almost all labor laws for 3 years. That means in a situation such as what we are facing today, where workers are losing their jobs, where the salaries have also been reduced in some sectors, instead of providing more safety, more cushion to the workers, we are violating the labor laws. But this newspaper column written by Gautam Bhatia, it raises another issue. It talks about this issue from a different perspective. Gautam Bhatia writes that once Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he was asked to prepare a note on the idea of fundamental rights. B.R. Ambedkar wrote a document and he said that right now our purpose is how can we preserve the freedom of an individual. That means the purpose of constitutions throughout the world have been how can we limit the state power. That's where we come across a doctrine called doctrine of limited government, which means the powers available with the state are not unlimited. There is a limitation on the powers of the state. One such limitation is the chapter of fundamental rights. For example, if you look at these fundamental rights, how are they worded? The state shall not deny equality. The state shall not discriminate. The state shall not deprive an individual of his right to life and personal liberty. The state shall not do this. The state shall not do that. That means all these are restrictions, limitations on the powers of the state. The state does not have the power to violate fundamental rights of its citizens. B.R. Ambedkar wrote in his document that the function, the purpose of the constitution is to limit the state power. But what about the power of the private parties? What about the power of the individuals and corporations? B.R. Ambedkar argued that the purpose of fundamental rights should also be to check this private power as well, to check the dictatorship of the private employer. Because right now the employer is massively the private sector. If these fundamental rights are applicable only against the state, they are not applicable against the private entities, which means there is going to be a dictatorship of the private employer. If you look at 1931, the Karachi session of Indian National Congress, which was presided over by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, this Karachi Declaration and Bill of Rights is considered to be the forerunner to the Constitution of India. If you look at the Bill of Rights of 1931, in its preamble, it was declared that political freedom must include real economic freedom. That is why Congress Party at that point in time said, tillers of the land will be the owners of the land. So once India will get independence, we will reform the zamindari system, or we will abolish the zamindari system. We will reform the land laws in this country. We will ensure that those who are working on the land should be provided ownership of that land. So land reforms will be one of the principal agendas of the Congress Party once India attains independence. But Gautam Bhatia argues, how do we understand force and freedom? For example, I am forcing you to sign on a piece of document. How am I forcing you? By pointing a gun to your throat or by having a knife right next to your throat. That means I'm forcing you through the force of gun, through the force of knife to do something. This is what we call force. But what about unseen force? Unseen force, for example, when all these changes are being made, when all these changes to the labor laws are being made, we can't say that the workers are working out of their free will, because we have forced them to work, because they don't have a choice. They don't have an alternative. We can't say, since there is no gun or no knife pointing on the throat of the workers, and that is why out of their free will they are working in the industries and factories. Because this compulsion, it may not take any physical form, but it will have a social and economic character that is nonetheless very severe. Because you are putting these workers in situations where they have no genuine choice left. And the Supreme Court of India understood this point in 1983. In 1982, Asian Games were to be held in Delhi. And for that, massive construction of infrastructure for the games were being carried out in Delhi. And then the workers were also forced to work for a longer duration of time, and they were paid less as well. One organization, People's Union for Democratic Rights, it approached the Supreme Court and said that this is something which is bonded labor. Supreme Court asked, what is bonded labor? Bonded labor is basically where you are forced to work without any wages as well. This is what we call bonded labor. So the Supreme Court asked this organization, is it bonded labor? PUDR said, yes, it is bonded labor, but it does not satisfy the two conditions of bonded labor. That means, number one, workers are not forced to work, and at the same time they are paid wages as well. The Supreme Court then asked, how is this forced labor? PUDR said they are forced to work for a longer duration of time. That means that is forced labor. And at the same time, although they are paid, but they are paid less, they are paid less than the minimum wages. The Supreme Court said there are situations wherein these workers are left with no other genuine choice, but they are left with no choice but to work, that too for longer hours. This is forced labor. And the only remedy that we can provide them, the only constitutional guarantee that we can provide them is the minimum wage. Gautam Bhatia basically argues that when these labor laws are being changed, workers will still work. They will still work for longer hours. They will still work for less wages. But that would be forced labor, and that would be violation of the constitutional guarantee under Article 23, which is a fundamental right. Article 23 says that there shall be prohibition on traffic, begar, and other forms of forced labor. And it shall be violation of the 1983 Supreme Court order as well, which provided a constitutional guarantee of minimum wages to the workers. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper column. Now let's look at another column, The Need for a Second Chamber, written by M. Venkaiah Naidu, the Vice President of India, who is also the ex officio chairperson of Rajya Sabha. This column is in two parts. This is part 1. Part 2 will be published tomorrow. Part 1 talks about what is the need for the second chamber, which is the Rajya Sabha. And tomorrow's part 2 will examine the functioning of Rajya Sabha since its inception in 1952. If you look at India, we have a bicameral central legislature. Central legislature, the parliament is bicameral. There are two houses. The lower house, Lok Sabha, the upper house, Rajya Sabha. When the Constituent Assembly was debating the constitution, there were some people who were against the idea of the second house of Indian Parliament. And there were some members who were in favor of the second chamber of Indian Parliament, which is the Rajya Sabha. Essays were written in 1787-88 by James Madison, who later became the President of United States as well, Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. And they explained the US Constitution and explained the reason for having second chamber of US Parliament. Because even US Congress, which is the US Parliament, it is bicameral. House of Representatives, lower house, and Senate, the upper house. They argued that second house should be there to keep a check on the first house. If you look at India, there are two reasons why we have Rajya Sabha, as explained by M. Venkaiah Naidu. Number one, if you look at the members of the Lok Sabha, we call Lok Sabha House of the People or Popular House. And Rajya Sabha is the House of Elders. One reason why we have Rajya Sabha is that Rajya Sabha is viewed as a deliberative house, is viewed as a house where there will be enough debates and discussions. And that's exactly what is happening. If you look at the quality of debates in Rajya Sabha, that is much better than Lok Sabha. That is one reason why we have Rajya Sabha, so that we have another house of Indian Parliament which acts as a deliberative house, which acts as a house of serious debates and discussions. And also because of the fact that in Rajya Sabha we have 12 nominated persons who are nominated by the president from the fields of art, literature, science, social service. So in Rajya Sabha, we may have domain expertise as well. We may have people who belong to different expertise areas. And these people who belong to different expertise areas, they are given representation in Rajya Sabha. That is why there will be better debate, better discussion, better deliberation in Rajya Sabha. And second reason why we have Rajya Sabha, why there is a need for Rajya Sabha, for that we will have to look at the arguments of N. Gopalaswamy Iyengar. Which means, let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, there is a rape of a minor girl, and then there are series of protests in India. These protests, they urge the House of the People, the lower house, the Lok Sabha MPs, that you should pass a law so that these rapists, they are not in a position to file mercy petitions before the president. Ultimately, House of the People, which is the popular house, it will succumb to this popular pressure. It will succumb to the pressure of the people, of the society, and ultimately will pass such a bill. But ultimately, when this bill is sent to Rajya Sabha, in Rajya Sabha there are elders, and in Rajya Sabha there will be series of discussions, debates, deliberations, so that we delay the passage of this bill. The purpose of the Rajya Sabha is to delay legislations which might be the outcome of passions of the moment until these passions have subsided. That is why we have Rajya Sabha. But what is the role played by Rajya Sabha since 1952 when it was constituted? For that, we will wait for the part 2 of this column written by the Vice President of India. Now let's look at the practice questions, first for prelims and then for mains. Question number 1. International Labour Organization is the only tripartite UN agency established in 1919. Tripartite because it involves government as well as the employer as well as the workers. That is why it is a unique, only tripartite UN agency. This statement is correct. In 1969, the ILO received the Nobel Peace Prize, correct. Its headquarters is in Geneva, Switzerland. All the statements are correct. D is the correct option. Why? What is the context? Trade unions, they have decided that they will knock at the doors of International Labour Organization because of the change in the labor laws that has been done by various state governments. Question number 2. Which of the following statements are correct regarding Aarogya Setu Data Access and Knowledge Sharing Protocol 2020? Number 1. The encrypted data. For example, you are downloading the Aarogya Setu app. There will be data. This data will be encrypted on your own device. This encrypted data will be automatically deleted in 30 days. But if you have underwent test for COVID-19, this data will be kept for 45 days. And if you have tested positive, once you have fully recovered, till 60 days, this data will be stored in your devices. After that, it will be automatically deleted according to this protocol which was released yesterday. Number 2, location is also used. For example, when you download Aarogya Setu app, your location is also monitored. Why? Only if you are tested positive. Because if you test positive, then we will have to monitor your location as well, so that we can monitor that for the past 14 days, where all were you going? So that we can understand which are going to be the potential hotspots of COVID-19. That is why the protocol says only if you are tested positive, only then your location data will be used, otherwise it will not be used. Statement number 3, your contact, your location, your self-assessment data. Let's say, for example, you have tested positive. Now, all your contacts you have been in touch with for the past 14 days, those contacts are to be traced. Your location will be traced. All this data will be collected by NIC, National Informatics Center, but it will not be retained beyond 180 days from which it has been collected, after which it will be permanently deleted. That means this data, which is encrypted, which is stored on your device, this data can be extracted, can be collected by NIC, but it can be collected, it can be retained only for a period of 180 days, after which it will be permanently deleted. And this protocol will remain in force for 6 months. Unless and until it is specifically extended, it will lapse in 6 months. So if the government wants to continue with this protocol sharing agreement, it will have to specify it again that this protocol is extended for a further period of 3 months or 4 months or 6 months. All these statements are correct. D is the correct answer. What is the context? Because Aarogya Setu data protocol norms have been issued. Question number 3. Which of the following statements are correct regarding Gandhi Peace Prize? Statement number 1. The International Gandhi Peace Prize is awarded annually by the Government of India. Correct. The award was launched in 1995. Correct. The award can be given to individuals alone and not institutions. No, it can be given to institutions as well. Fourth, only achievements within 10 years immediately preceding the nomination are considered for this award. Correct? So C is the correct answer. Only options 1, 2 and 4 are correct. What is the context? Nominations for Gandhi Peace Prize have been extended by the government. Question number 4. The term blob is associated with which of the following? Marine heat waves in Northeast Pacific. Question number 5, prelims based question 2019. Consider the followings about Charter Act of 1813. Number 1, it ended the trade monopoly of the East India Company in India except for trade in tea and trade with China. Correct. This monopoly was withdrawn only in 1833. Statement number 2, it asserted the sovereignty of the British Crown over the Indian territories held by the company. So all the territories which were held by the company, for the first time, they were referred to as possessions by the Charter Act of 1813. Statement number 2 is correct. Statement number 3, the revenues of India were now controlled by the British Parliament. No. The revenues were to be controlled by the company for another 20 years. So which of the above statements are correct? 1 and 2, A is the correct answer. Mains based question, answers should be in less than 250 words. Question number 1. No country can develop that does not invest in human capital of its citizens, that does not increase the share of labor in the country's wealth, and does not get the balance between the capital and labor right. Comment. This is the statement given by Pratap Banu Mehta. This is the statement I have taken from today's Indian Express article. Question number 2. What is judicial evasion? Comment on the disturbing trends of judicial evasion in India. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.